Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For more than 27 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, the environment, alternative economics, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. This month, we will take a fresh look at democracy, specifically how to make democracy more real and more vibrant by practicing it at the local level. We'll examine the growing movement for a vibrant grassroots democracy through local efforts called Community Rights Ordinances, CROs. We have three guests who can help us understand community rights ordinances and how we might adopt one locally, perhaps focusing on an issue like sustainable food or some other issue. Kai Huschke came from Spokane to be a guest on our program. Kai has been very active with a nationwide nonprofit organization that has been promoting the CRO movement. He is the Northwest organizer for the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. John Pierce also has a background in the CRO movement. John is a writer, facilitator, instructional designer, and consultant to businesses across North America. TJ Johnson is a former member of the Olympia City Council. He's worked in many ways to improve our local community. For several years, he's worked especially hard on local food sustainability. Good to have all of you folks here. We will have a good time and raise some fresh ideas, fresh possibilities for people.
Absolutely.
Probably everybody watching the TV program senses that democracy in the United States has been weakened and corrupted over the years. In a nutshell, could anybody mention what some of the current problems are and how they came about?
Well, I think what we've increasingly seen in the work that we've been doing through the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund is that when big issues happen in communities, let's say around food or energy production, I think communities find out that they're not the decision makers, that a system has been concocted, in essence, to keep people away from being the true decision makers in their communities. Mm-hmm. Therefore, democracy itself seems to be, in so many cases, really a myth. And so that confrontation seems to be getting more real, especially as the Earth is in the crisis that it's in. Mm-hmm. And this ability, or this desire, I should say, to extract further and further has really confronted our communities even more concretely with the reality that maybe we don't have the democracy that we thought we had.
Mm-hmm. Well, back when I was in school, they taught civics. And I think even people who never had civics have heard of the Constitution and we the people. And it's not we the people. It's we the corporations. The rights that they told us that we had and the things that they said were possible, from everything I've been able to determine the last couple of years especially, it's not true.
And likewise, we've come to identify ourselves not primarily as citizens, but primarily as consumers, as part of this disempowerment of individual notions that we have some control over our future. They've been replaced by ideas of, if you just continue to purchase the right products, everything works good.
Yeah. Well, after 9/11, George Bush told us to go shopping.
Right,
That's a perfect example.
Leave the big issues, the big questions to him and Dick Cheney, and you just go out and decide whether to buy this brand or that brand.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Right. There's this great quotation from Louis Brandeis, a Supreme Court justice from 1916 to 1939, and he said, "We can have a democratic society, or we can have the concentration of great wealth in the hands of the few. We cannot have both."
Guess what we have now.
Yeah. So our government includes, a legislative branch, an executive branch, and the judicial branch. Why are these branches not working?
Well, I think in some ways they are working. The question is, who are they working for?
Okay.
So I think that's part of the myth busting that has to happen. And unfortunately, it happens, at least in the work we do, it happens in crisis, where communities are faced with real threats to their food systems or their drinking water, something of which they run directly into. For those folks, they understand that the system is the problem. In essence, we have a structural problem. It's not something that's just been invented in the last 30 years, but foundationally we have this problem of which the ability actually to make decisions, as TJ was saying, sort of our own self-determination doesn't exist. And we've sort of been convinced that the systems of government, the Constitution itself, the different branches somehow are there for us. And I think communities, especially those faced with the crisis situation, realize the system isn't there for us. It happens to be there for other interests, and it's still small, powerful few, based on the quote you just gave, that now is coming in the corporate form, who's making the decisions about what our communities look like.
Yeah, we have a lot of regulatory agencies in the executive branch of state and local government, and these regulatory agencies are supposed to regulate businesses that deal with, pollution or communications or whatever. How well does it work to try to impact regulatory agencies for these kinds of decisions that you're talking about?
Well, a perfect example is to take a look at the United States Department of Agriculture. It has essentially become a revolving door agency for executives from the biotechnology and the big agribusiness companies. So, for example, you have these people who are senior executives at Monsanto and these other firms. They come in and they become regulators in the Department of Agriculture, people like Michael Taylor and Roger Beachy. And then when the administration changes, they move right back through that revolving door, back into the industries that they came from in the first place. And this goes on whether you have a Democrat in the White House or a Republican in the White House. So it's not partisan, it's systemic and it's structural about the way big money influences the regulatory structures.
And the regulatory agencies, this is something I learned in CELDEF, the Community Legal Defense Fund, Environmental Defense Fund, in their democracy school, is that by the nature of what they are, they regulate how much the corporations can hurt us. The EPA
Tell us what that
regulates
means,
the EPA regulates how much pollution they can throw into the air and the water. It doesn't stop them from doing it. It just says that you can do it, but you can only do it to this level.
Yeah, and so they would do it then up to the maximum.
Well, and then if you go beyond the maximum, you get a little wrist slap and have to pay 5% of your profits and a fine.
But it's that's just the cost of doing business. I know from things I've read, depending on what the fines are or the penalties, big banks, for example, it's just the cost of doing business if you get caught, because the fine is minimal compared to the profits that you make by doing some abuse.
Well, and they're working it from both ends. So you pay the fine if you get caught, but you also at the same time are working to weaken the regulatory structure and to bring the standards down so that it's easier to not get caught in the future. So they're working both sides of the equation.
And a couple other things to add to everything that's been said here is often the regulations are actually written by the industry themselves. So you see in the food industry, for instance, that it's the industrial food companies that actually set up the regulations about how factory farms work. And so in essence, they write the rules, they have the legislatures enact it, and then the regulatory bodies, the regulatory agencies, then become the administrators of it.
And they're limited then by what the regulations say.
But they've set those limits.
They've written the rules.
Right.
So when it comes down to the community level, which I think is fundamentally what hasn't happened to the level that it needs to, is when we start to play in the regulatory world, it's not about saying no. Or even more importantly, it's not even saying about yes to a sustainable food system, because the regulations are about permitting it. Okay, a permit is a permit because it's about permitting something. It's been legalized, so factory farm is a legal practice of which corporations tend to be the major players doing it. And so when the communities say we don't want factory farming because that doesn't fit our model of what agriculture looks like, well, guess what? They have no authority to say no to it because the system is set up, the legal system is set up the way. Constitutionally, it all goes down, even down to the Constitution itself. So when TJ says it's structural, it is structural down to the first stone laid about how these systems function, whether it's food or energy or anything else. And so the question is, when we run into this, what do we do about it if we have a system of which keeps us from truly being the decision makers about what affects us within our own community?
So the implication then would be we'd have to get down to a more basic level. And when we were preparing for this TV program, you talked about starting with our fundamental rights. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, again, John mentioned about schooling, we have this fundamental notion, or this notion in our head that's, a colleague of mine says this: the IV drip's been put in our arms since whatever age we're at, that we live in a democracy, and that we have inherent rights as people, and that this idea of self-determination exists. Yet in practice, we see a very different world. And so the question is, if we believe those rights exist, what are we going to do about actually exercising those rights? So you go to the state constitution of Washington State, for instance. Well, what's the first provision in there? Well, it's about all political power being inherent in the people, and that the only reason government exists is for the sake of actually protecting the rights of people. What we see is something very reverse today, which is about protecting really commercial interests or commerce or property over that of rights. And I think what communities are doing differently in the work that we help them with is to fundamentally understand that we have the rights of self-determination, that we have the rights to protect the very basic elements of life, whether it's water, air, or food, or shelter, or whatever it is. And unless we begin to actually exercise that, we can expect more of the same, because that other system of which we thought was a system of democracy really isn't democratic at all. And so that's why I said myths have to be shattered before we could actually start to mobilize and move in a very different manner.
Because a different system has been interposed between our day-to-day reality and those fundamental rights, or that other system.
I think the system has always been there. The propaganda has told us we've had another system. And we've had times in our own history where we've pushed back, in essence said, we need to have greater rights recognitions. And so the abolitionist movement, or the suffragist movement, or to a degree also the civil rights movement, where people said, well, wait a second, what's the point of government if it's not about protecting rights? And we've had to actually battle for that in our own history, let alone the history of the globe and these kinds of things. And so I think we're at that point again where communities are waking up to the fact that they are being oppressed by a system of which they thought they had remedy within. And the reality is we don't. We get regulated. So the regulations really are less about the corporations and they're more about regulating people or regulating activists. And we have to get rid of that, because guess what? Those rules were written by somebody else, so it's someone else's game. So are we going to come to realization that we actually have the power to change it? And that means we have to actually establish a new game in a lot of ways. And that's the difficulty of actually when you confront these dominant systems like the industrial food system is a gigantic beast. We have to look at doing it in very different ways than we've done it up to this point, because guess what? We're losing horribly, not only personally and public health-wise and community-wise, but of course ecologically. We're screwing up the entire planet by the way that we produce food today.
Anything else to add? I've got a quotation from John Adams from 1776, who was one of the founders of the country and our second president. He said, government, he agrees with Kai. He didn't footnote you here, but he's on your side. He says, government is instituted for the common good, for the protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness of the people, and not for profit, honor, or private interest of any one man, family, or class of men. Therefore, the people alone have an incontestable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to institute government and to reform, alter, or totally change the same when their protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness requires it. This is 1776, John Adams, and he's, agreeing with you.
Yeah.
They lost that thread in the next 20 years when they were writing the Constitution.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're at. I mean, if we want viable, healthy, localized food, I don't see another way around it besides actually dealing structurally with who's making the decisions around what our food system looks like. And it's not you and I today. It's a handful of companies.
Or the other kinds of issues we care about
Could
the
be
environment.
any of
It
it.
could be, commercial relations, banking. I mean, there's so many different.
You could apply this, I think, to just about any place that the people want to do something and they're told, no, you can't do that because the regulations say that you can't do it. It's supposed to be our system. It's supposed to be our government. So if we don't like it, change it.
So what else might we say about the importance of grassroots democracy, that instead of just voting for people to represent us, what if we, the people, actually practice democracy at a more direct way rather than through the medium of representatives.
Voting's not taking, I mean, to me, voting is a very, very small part of what a true democracy would be. And unfortunately, they've rigged the system, they being not us, have rigged the system so that people are so busy trying to survive, so busy trying to live, trying to just make it so they can make their next house payment or go to the store and buy food, that they don't have, a lot of them don't have time to pay attention. And then you have the, you know, oh geez, I was really interested in doing that, but then I saw something shiny. You know, they have American Idol and all these other things, and every year you hear about more people vote for American Idol than vote for president, for crying out loud.
Well, and then
it's all they've in sports on TV and all these other things. They've done so many things to distract us that politics is confusing, and they're all crooks, and I'd rather watch the ball game.
Yeah. Well, then even with the voting system, that's been corrupted too in the same way through big money and secret money that the Supreme Court says is just fine.
Was it the Joe Stalin that said it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes?
Right.
I don't,
Yeah, I think it was.
Joe never consulted with me about that, and we never had him as a guest on the program here, so.
Would have been interesting.
That would have been
But, I mean,
fun.
to your point, I mean, I think fundamentally that is what has to happen. In essence, that the understanding is we have a responsibility if government's not functioning in the way it is, and it's not that guy over there or the legislator over here. Well, it's the people that live in the places where they live that actually have to begin exercising that, because, well, that's an inherent aspect of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah, and the campaign finance system is part of what needs to get changed, along with all of these other systems.
That's 2 more shows.
Yeah, well, and we've done shows on that too, but we got to do this again. There's a whole notion of corporate personhood that gets into this, and I wonder if any of you could explain succinctly what corporate personhood is, how it came about, and what the implications are.
I could butcher it. I think Kai probably could
Yeah.
give us a better. He's more of a knowledgeable person, at least in my world. In
mean,
that.
Yeah, I defer to
We
Kai.
have to realize that when we have issues of which we confront as a community, or we're in a position where we want to advocate for a different, let's say, way food is grown, we're going to run into many different things. Usually we run into the state first, because it's the state who preempts the local in some manner or the other. We're going to run into other legal doctrines that sit out there. We actually run into the Constitution itself. And we run in the Constitution itself through things like corporate personhood. So, in essence, corporate personhood basically has come about because corporations have used the judicial system. In essence, they've ran cases through the judicial system all the way up to the Supreme Court level to make arguments that corporations should be seen as the same as you and I, the same as people. And in doing so, they've made arguments that eventually the courts decided, well, yes, by all means, corporations are the same as people. Therefore, they should have the same rights protections as people. So therefore, they should be seen as people under the law, which eventually has now led to corporations having personhood rights. Personhood rights, in essence, mean bills of rights protections, as well as additional rights that were added after the original Bill of Rights was added. So 14th Amendment, which of course everyone knows from their own history, was about equal protection and due process under the law for freed slaves. Well, guess what? Corporations have 14th Amendment right protections. They also have other personhood type right protections, whether it's the 5th Amendment or the 6th Amendment, the same as you and I do. So what does that mean? Who cares? Well, what's the big deal if corporations have rights? Well, the big deal is if you're in a community, for instance, of which you say no to a particular type of corporate practice that you don't feel is sustainable for your community. So let's say you want to say no to the factory farm coming in, or the land application of sewage sludge, or whatever it might be.
Well, we had, if I can just interrupt
Sure.
for a second, a few years ago, we tried to keep Walmart out of Tumwater.
Yep.
And this same exact thing happened.
So
They
if it-
basically came in and said, you can't do that, we have Bill of Rights rights.
Yeah. So it's a situation then when if you try to do that, well, guess what? You violate the corporation's constitutional rights, their personhood rights, because you are now treating that corporation differently than another corporation. Therefore, you're not giving them equal protection under the law.
Yeah.
So this is how this stuff functions, and that's one one shield or one spear, whatever you want to define it at, that corporations use against communities when they actually try to reject the bad stuff, or even when they try to elevate the good stuff. They run into a structure of law and governance that sees corporations as really being super citizens to that of the community itself. And not just people, but governments itself. So in instance, your state government, for instance, can't reject something of which is considered legal or considered commerce, or can't do anything to violate the corporation's constitutional rights. That's why regulatory agencies can't say no, because if they did so, well, guess what? It's government acting on behalf of violating someone's rights, just in the same way the government's not supposed to violate our rights. Government can't violate the same constitutional personhood rights of corporations.
Well, and that's even moved into the international arena now, to where national governments, like the United States governments, can't exercise control over these corporations, because in so doing, they run afoul of the WTO and these world trade rules, and we wind up, in good conscience trying to protect people, the environment, whatever it is here in the United States, are sued by governments, and routinely the corporations lose. The corporations win, the governments lose, and the people lose.
And it's foreign corporations suing because we say you can't have more than X amount of mercury in fish.
And it's American corporations suing other countries for those same sorts of protections they're trying to put for their people and their environments.
And the Trans-Pacific Partnership that Obama's trying to fast track through Congress without even a debate is more of this stuff. They call it a trade thing, and there's only 5 articles in it out of 29 that have to do with trade, and the other ones ramp up with TJ saying where corporations are going to be able to sue our government and say, no, you can't do this. You can't have a minimum wage because that makes you unfair with the other
If some
countries.
corporation doesn't want to pay minimum wage when they set up a branch in your country, then they can sue to override that.
We only pay $5 a week in Vietnam. That's what we're going to pay here.
Yeah. So we've got trapped into this mindset, and I found this interesting quotation from Herbert Marcuse, who said, "The success of the system is to make unthinkable the possibility of alternatives." And so what we're about here on this program is to look at some alternatives, and I want to lift up that notion of the community rights ordinances, because it just breaks that whole system out and says, let's go back to the fundamental rights and do it again from the grassroots up. Tell us about the concept of what a community rights ordinance, a CRO, is.
Yeah, I mean, from our vantage point as initially an environmental law firm doing conventional environmental law, which is regulatory law, what we've come to understand is that all we were really doing was helping the corporate interests move their permitting stuff faster through the system, in essence.
So a corporation says, we want to set up a mine here or discharge water into the stream, and you guys sue and say, wait a minute, under some environmental law, you can't dump that amount of polluted water in. And then they just go back and rework their application.
Sure, there's always workarounds. I think the understanding is we live in a box, in essence, and that box has various pressure points pushing in on us. And so long as we sit inside that box, we can expect the same stuff to continue. And in essence, we'll keep doing it over and over again, expecting a different result, which is the definition, I suppose, some people say, of insanity. So the question is, what do we do to get ourselves out of the box? And I think fundamentally the shift that communities have started to do that we help with is understand that if we don't exercise our right to self-determination, our self-government, in essence, local self-government, and on top of that, actually protect valuable elements to our communities from a rights perspective. So an example would be, we deal with a lot of communities that are facing fracking now, so this natural gas drilling process, which is obviously bad on a multitude of levels. Communities are asserting their rights to say no to that, and asserting their rights to protect the elements of which make a viable community, which is clean air, water, soil. Their desire not only to reject that harmful, unsustainable energy, but actually to embrace sustainable energy projects. When you begin to do so, because our system is set up for you at the local level to have no authority to do that, you also have to take on the sides of that box simultaneous to the issue itself, which is to begin to reject this idea that localities don't have the authority to do that, which means you get to run into the state, which means you get to run into the Constitution, which means you get to run into the corporation itself. because it's the box itself that restrains us. And so unless we pull ourselves out of the box and begin to dismantle that box, we're going to get the same things over and over again. So the difficulty is it's about the issue, of course, which is usually what mobilizes people, because they want good food or they don't want spoiled water because of the way that natural gas extraction works. But in order to really truly do that, you also have to take out the system itself that is denying you that, because it has authority to preempt you, or the international trade agreements, whatever it is just another layer of denying your ability to actually have a viable community. And so the laws themselves go at it from the rights perspective, and within them is also pulling away those powers if they're about undermining the rights. Because if rights are centrally what government's supposed to be about, well, that's the central element that has to be driven forward. And in essence, when preemptive law comes in to deny those rights, how can you at the local level actually accept that to be the viable, legitimate system? So you're throwing off what more communities are starting to realize is the illegitimate system. The illegitimate system, what's being touted today is the legitimate system. Folks are saying, I would like to say a word that I probably can't say on TV, to the fact that that's not the legitimate system because it denies rights. And so how can government exist that actually denies rights? So they're fundamentally coming at it from a very different vantage point to say we have to recognize rights, and we actually have to reject the system which says that we don't have that ability to make those decisions. And it's a very bold move that has very serious consequences, but so did abolition, so did suffrage, so did the civil rights movement. I mean, it's that level of, in essence, collective nonviolent civil disobedience through local lawmaking, to give it a term, that communities are engaging in now. Because the reality is they understand if we keep doing it the way we're doing it, we're screwed.
Yeah. So what are some examples of community rights ordinances that have been adopted at local levels elsewhere? I know Pennsylvania has been kind of the hotbed of
Sure. I
starting
mean,
these.
we were in Pennsylvania, so this stuff sprung out of Pennsylvania. You have community rights ordinances or rights-based ordinances, however the phrasing folks want to use, in about 12 different states, about 160 some communities now, covering a wide variety of issues, which is another important point for people hopefully to take. It doesn't matter if it's about GMOs or factory farm or sewage sludge or coal mining or fracking or corporate water withdrawal, or solid waste or GMOs, it doesn't really matter what the issue you put within. The structure functions pretty much the same. And everything I listed are either ordinances that have been adopted or attempted to be adopted today in the communities that we've worked with. So in essence, those folks have rejected the system for what it is and actually are starting to put in new lawmaking to actually support the idea of self-determination. Also included with that is almost these things operate as mini constitutions for what people want. And this stuff is now starting to move to a higher level because in essence they understand that the superstructure is still in place. They're going to have to deal with at state and federal level at some point. But like every movement, it's got to come from the ground up, just like good agriculture has to come from viable soil. So it's the same thing with people's movements.
Yeah, none of the fundamental changes that have moved us ahead throughout our history has come as a gift from above. Women's right to vote, women were agitating for 70 years before they finally won that in 1920 something. But none of this, and the labor movement, the environmental movement, all of these things, civil rights, nothing was a gift from governments or big corporations or other power holders or oppressors saying, hey, we're going to give you a gift and let you gals vote. It's like they had to work for it. And it's all these are bottom up.
Yeah.
So what else do we need to know about community rights ordinances? Is there any other basic insights or examples or anything?
In my world, Kai knows a lot more about this than just about anybody I've ever met. And so I think he's covered it. The one thing I would reiterate is, and you both already said this, is it could be with regards to anything. It could, there's the many things he mentioned. There's anything that, at least as I understand it, anything you don't like in your community that someone from outside is coming in and saying this is how you have to do it because we said so, I think that would be a candidate for a CRO. The trick is finding something that the community can get behind and finding something that enough people are passionate about or care about on any level to get a movement going so that we can start this ground up thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that's exciting to me about one of the many things that's exciting to me about this is that it has appeal across the political spectrum. So the origins in Pennsylvania, especially dealing with fracking and stuff, were out of some of the conservative areas, and you have like people who are like hardcore Republicans, along with environmentalists, along with people who identify as the political left. I mean, it's the spectrum that can find rights in common.
Yeah, I think so.
And that's exciting, and that's really positive for democracy.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
again-
we have to start using a different language about what it is we want. And the rights-based language, I think, has that power of which the political affiliations fall away when that happens. I think one other thing to kind of add to what John was saying about that it applies to any issue, well, part of the question becomes, well, where does this stuff go? And I mentioned it has to scale up. Well, you have folks now in Colorado who've been working on fracking issues there, in essence, to reject what they saw as very harmful projects coming into their community through a rights-based perspective. And what they've decided now is that, and I think they've understood for some time now, it's not just about the fracking, but so many of the other issues that we face in our own communities. They've now filed a state initiative to recognize constitutionally in the state of Colorado, if it were to get on the ballot and be passed, the right to local self-government, actually spelled out. And within it is to say that we at the local level need to have the ability to increase rights if we feel so in regards to our own community that it's necessary. It's not about devaluing rights at the local level. In essence, there's a floor that would be set to allow localities actually to increase rights. What do they have to do simultaneous to that? Well, they have to reject this notion that corporations have rights. Well, corporations don't have rights. They have powers and privileges that have been, put in the guise of rights by the way the courts have worded it. And another element we haven't talked about at all, which is really the bigger piece here, is we live in an ecology, whether it's a local ecology or a broader ecology. And unfortunately, as the law sits today, pretty much globally, and the United States included, is it sees nature, it sees the environment as property. In essence, if you own it, you can do what you want with it, is the basic equation. What these communities have started to do differently is actually through the legal system to look at nature as having rights. So this idea of rights of nature is another element that's being moved in, saying that our human practices have to live within the bounds of what the ecology can actually withstand, such that we're not damaging it. So we have to take a very different view, which of course is not a very different view in the way that human beings have looked at ecology. It happens to be a different view of Western thinking around it. So this idea of rights of nature is also part of this new state initiative coming into Colorado. So you're starting to see this upswell again coming from the bottom to push this notion about, again, what is government supposed to be about? And again, we can go back to things like the Declaration of Independence, or we can go back to our own constitutions and see really, in some ways, if we need permission, in essence. We have a strange notion, I think, in this country that we're always looking for permission, or always looking for someone else to lead us. And I think that has to fall to the wayside as well, because we are the experts.
Yeah.
We're the people that live in our community. We actually have to begin to rise up in greater numbers.
Yeah, there's sort of an implication in this that we're all in this together. And as we were preparing for this interview, one of you had mentioned Pastor Niemöller, who in Nazi Germany said, well, first they came for the Jews, and I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't speak up. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't speak up. And they came for the communists, they came for the gays, they came for, and pretty soon they came for me, and by that time nobody was left to speak up. So this approach that we're taking has this kind of we're all in this together approach as a humanity within the community that has a bottom-up validity to it.
Well, and if you look at, like, the first time I heard this thing about nature having rights, I was sort of, but I got thinking about it, and something while Kai was just talking hit me that nature has rights, but it can't speak for them. So we need to speak up for nature, because we need nature, as he just said. We need nature to survive, and we've done more negatives to the planet in the last even 30 or 40 years than people have done over thousands of years. And if somebody thinks, well, nature's not a thing, it doesn't need, it doesn't have rights, then think about children. we say children have rights and adults are the ones that are supposed to stand up for children's rights. A lot of that is because without the children, the race does not survive. To me, the connection I just made is without nature, we don't survive. So we have to protect nature.
I want to spend a few minutes looking at sustainable local food as an example, not the only example, but an example of what we might do. Before we get into that, I want to see, TJ, if you could explain what some of the problems are with the way we do food in this country nowadays, at this sort of industrial food model.
Well, the primary problem is that we don't produce food to feed people. We produce food to create profits for corporations. So we've organized an entire production system, financing system, transportation, distribution system around the notion of generating profits, not feeding people. So what's the result? Massive profits for a handful of agribusiness corporations, massive hunger throughout the world, and increasingly in our own country here. The number of people eligible for food stamps in the United States went from $28 million when Barack Obama took office.
28 million people?
28 million people when Barack Obama took office to 50 million people now on food stamps. And the political response to that was in the Farm Bill passed by Congress the end of January, signed by Obama in early February, was we cut food stamp benefits, but we preserved subsidies for the corporations that are already profiting from the system. We cut conservation funding in the Farm Bill for the first time since 1985 so that we had enough money to keep channeling the subsidies to the people that had the CAFOs, to the people that are producing the commodity corn.
CAFO is
confined animal feeding operations.
So
These are the factory farms that we talk
gigantic
about.
feedlot
Right.
things.
So the people that are making food that makes us sick, that pollutes the environment, are making a lot of money. And public policy says, we want you to keep making money. And that happens at the expense of the environment and at the expense of human health and people who need food.
And these grants they're giving them, they're actually taking our tax money from us.
That's all our money.
To give to these corporations to increase their profits so they can continue to poison us.
The Farm Bill is going to spend $1 trillion over the next 10 years of our money.
Right. Well, and
of
just
our money.
real quick, if I can jump into what a trillion is. A few years ago, I did the math because I kept hearing about billions of dollars. So a trillion is 1,000 billion. A billion. If you had, let me see if I can do the math real quick. If you got $1, I'm sorry. Talk about $1 trillion. If you got $1,000 every minute, how long would it take you to get $1 trillion? Every minute, 24 hours a day, $1,000, which is $1,440,000 a day. It would take you 1,901 years to get $1 trillion.
There's perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
$1,000 a minute.
So to connect with what you're saying about that and this notion of rights, you told me on the phone a couple days ago that the United Nations had adopted a statement affirming that everybody has the right to be free from hunger.
Right, 1999.
So there's a whole different right
right, and
that's been neglected.
Right, exactly, and that's a right that the United States signed onto and recognized, that everyone has a right to be free from hunger. Yet we see hunger increase, we see programs to combat hunger decrease, and we see the pockets of the agribusinesses continue to bulge with our money.
Okay, yeah. So if if there were to be a community rights ordinance with a local emphasis, say in Thurston County or in one of the cities here, say Tumwater or Olympia, based on food rights, sustainable local food, what might be some elements?
So there's a couple things that come to mind for me. The first is around what we can call the means of production, i.e. farmland. We've lost well over half of the farmland in our county in the last 50 years, and we're on track to lose what little is left. If you don't have farms, you don't have food. If you don't have food, you don't have people who aren't hungry, right? So one thing a community rights ordinance could do is it could prioritize a policy of no loss of farmland in our community, which, to our credit, our local policy makers have already been talking about as a result of the Sustainable Thurston Plan that they completed last year. But what a community rights ordinance could do is to take this abstract notion of we don't want to lose farmland and operationalize it in a way of saying, we don't want to lose it, and here's how we're going to do it. And one of those ways might be that we as a community are going to invest in purchasing that land, taking it out of the speculative real estate market, and make it available for people who want to grow food to feed people in our community. Another way that we could think about community rights ordinance here, we're lucky we don't have a lot of these big agribusiness firms and corporations in our county. For the most part, we still have family farms. That's fabulous. So the people producing our food are still local people on local farms. But the people selling us food are primarily national grocery stores and these warehouse stores. So every time, you mentioned Walmart earlier, Walmart comes into Tumwater, starts selling groceries, local grocery stores are displaced from that market because of the unfair competition. So a community rights ordinance could say, we will no longer allow people to be food retailers in our community if those people are not headquartered in our community, or if those people aren't selling a certain percentage of food that comes from our community. So we begin to dictate the terms of the mediated transaction that happens between producers of food and consumers of food. And we do that in a way that's consistent with community values.
Okay, so, and then that would have some enforcement value. I mean, it would be enforceable, right, in some way.
I mean, that becomes
that's the
that's
issue.
the crux.
Right,
You know,
yeah, so-
I mean, I think what TJ is saying there is about, you know, in a lot of cases that we're starting to do deeper and deeper research into what a sustainable localized food system actually would entail, you know, the inventorying of the viability of farmland and whatnot. But in so many ways, everything's there already in so many ways. The problem is when you begin to operationalize it, that's where you run into that box that says you can't do that. So even when you would have pushed for the good stuff, you run into that. So the question is, it does need to come from what is it that we really want. That has to be the wellspring. And then we'll have to see how it gets shaped, but you may, in most cases, if it's serious decision-making around a sustainable food system is, well, guess what? You're going to run into the structure that has no interest whether you here in Thurston County or Olympia want a sustainable food system, because we have legally protected unsustainable food systems out there that are the dominant systems today. But that's where we're at in relation to the fundamental aspects. So when you talked about the UN having fundamental rights to food, what does that really mean when we don't have a system that fundamentally believes it's a right? I mean, that's a huge disconnect.
So that's the gap between a nice statement versus actually making that happen.
And I think the challenge here is, you know, we have more and more communities embracing these community rights ordinance approaches, and at some point we become enough of an irritant to the dominant systems that there's a pushback. And that's where we get into this interesting realm that I think Kai was alluding to, of this will get played out in a legal system at some point in terms of, you know, what are our rights as communities? How far can we push this? And what changes do we need to make to that structure to enable our own rights?
It also gets played out in the public consciousness and the public ethics. I mean, it's like how many people can be brutalized at a lunch counter because you're the wrong color to be sitting at this lunch counter, and how many people can be attacked with police dogs and fire hoses because you just want to vote, but you're the wrong color to vote. And the public looks at what's going on, they go, wait a minute, this isn't the America that I want to live in. We've got to change the way things function in the South or wherever so that we have a democracy that's for all of us. And if we were to do some of these things we're talking about, whether it's on food or environment or human rights issues, whatever, the public would become engaged in this, and when the public shifts, then the government kind of has to go along with it. I mean, that's how these things change.
Yeah, I mean, that conversation has to happen in a lot of arenas, whether it's in the
Yes.
courtroom, in the public arena.
Yeah.
And that's where if organizing continues to be in the more conventional regulatory way, you don't have those conversations, because then
Right.
all your arguments about are the parts per million or the hours of operation
Yeah.
or the amount of effluent, and
Yeah.
they're
How
never
much
about
landscaping in front of
Yeah.
the Walmart?
They're never about fundamental rights to food because, well, you don't get to make those arguments when you say in the regulatory
Yeah.
world because they have no interest in fundamental rights.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is exactly what needs to shift.
Right.
One of the other issues you have too is that with the civil rights movement, for example, that was out there. You could see it. It was very visible what was happening. They had white and colored drinking fountains and restrooms and lunch counters and everything else. One of the big problems with the food is that, I mean, how many people in this country and in this community think that the meat comes in styrofoam trays with plastic wrap over it? They don't really know
doesn't?
where the meat comes from. And even worse, the thing about what we're putting in our bodies, nobody's really going to see the results of that for 10 or 20 years.
Right.
And so it's hard to get excited. I talked earlier about how people are, it's tough to get people engaged. It's even tougher to get them engaged in something that's not going to really impact them visibly or noticeably
Right.
for 10 or 20 years.
And this is part of what's going on with the effort to require labeling of genetically modified
Exactly.
food. 'Cause
Right.
If it's not on the label, you don't pay attention. But if it says how much fat or how much sugar is there, you can pay attention and make a choice as an informed consumer, even within that box of consumer stuff. But the stuff, like if I'm outside, I don't know how many parts per million of what is in the air that I breathe. So these things are hidden, and we need ways to lift these up and make these visible. But like issues of food would be something that there would be a lot of interest in this community.
It affects
because
everybody.
Everybody eats. This local community supports farmers market. We have a lot of people supporting these community-supported agriculture, CSAs. People in Thurston County voted yes in favor of the Initiative 522 to label for genetically modified foods.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest in food sustainability here in this community. It would be easy to convert that to a community rights ordinance.
Yeah, I think
Easier.
in terms of a political power base that could get some traction on a community rights ordinance, I think food might be our best leverage point right now. I look at what's happened here over the last few years with the organizing of the Community Food Summit, where we sold more tickets than we thought, than we
yeah.
had space for in 2011.
Right.
And then when this whole sustainable Thurston process started at the Regional Planning Council, they came out to the community and said, here's what we're going to do for the next 3 years. They weren't even talking about food. And the community pushed back and said, you have to deal with food and agriculture because that's a cornerstone of any sustainable community. And guess what? It went from not being in the plan to being probably the most talked about element of the plan. And now we have 33 really specific actions that have been approved by the Regional Planning Council, City Council people, mayors, and county commissioners all over the county, all of whom are falling over themselves to help create a sustainable food system. Let's use that power and energy and direct it in a way that leads us to a truly sustainable food system and not just smoothing the rough edges on a completely dysfunctional industrial food system.
Right. The people of this community have a track record of rising up in a profoundly small d democratic way. We had, I mean, you were the head honcho of the effort in 2012 to get a
Get permission to look at public power.
yeah, but I mean, but the public, it caught the public's interest, and even though Puget Sound Energy spent humongous amounts of money, and we were just this little shoestring volunteer thing,
Yeah.
we got 40-something% of the vote.
We got 41% of the vote and spent.
And it just came out of nowhere in just a couple months of organizing. It was amazing.
Well, and we learned a lot of things in that
Yeah.
effort
Yeah.
that I think can be used in the
Right.
community rights
So,
effort,
and there have been
too.
some other community-based things. Local people in the city of Olympia pushed back against city council members in Olympia who wanted to build a conference center in violation of public sentiment. And they pushed back against
The
city council
isthmus height.
people that wanted, the
Yes.
building heights
Building
on the
heights.
isthmus. I mean, there have been a number of times where the people say, hell no, we're not going to let you rip us off or do whatever to us. So, I mean, I think a CRO on whatever topic, whether it's food or something else, could do well in this community, and it's worth.
Yeah, and the
pushing.
important thing is we have to do this in every community because they
Yeah.
can spend millions of dollars to defeat the initiative for public power. They can spend millions of dollars to defeat the GMO labeling initiative here and in California. They can't keep doing that in every community everywhere as we all push back on them. And
Right.
at some point, the dam breaks open.
Right. And we've already had a bunch of these, as you mentioned, not only in Pennsylvania, but efforts in Colorado and New Mexico. Spokane nearly got one through. I mean, there's a lot.
Isn't Ben doing something with GMOs?
Benton County,
Benton
Oregon,
County.
Benton
Lane
County,
County,
Oregon,
Oregon.
yeah.
I think, exactly to TJ's point, we got to increase the numbers because we're not anywhere to the point where, in some ways, we're even on the radar to the degree that we need to be.
Right.
So that has to happen. And I think another big lesson, again, from other people's movements is you gotta keep coming back.
Yeah.
So if you lose at the polls or you lose in public opinion or whatever it is, you got to keep mobilizing. And as long as the frame is contained and the frame is that of rights, and you hold that,
Yeah.
and you can keep marching forward with that, that's eventually is what will break
Yeah,
loose and change the system.
The first time around on some electoral effort like this, you have an uphill struggle because you got to inform and educate the voters about the concept. Like with Initiative 520, you had to educate people about what genetically modified foods were and get that up. And likewise on the public power. And so if we were to do something, do it again, and then it would be an easier thing the next time around. I want to put in a plug for the organization that you're active with, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund at www.celdf.org. It's based in Pennsylvania, but you're a Northwest organizer.
Yeah, we've got organizers in the Northeast, in New Mexico, here in the Northwest, in Ohio, Pennsylvania.
And there is local organizing in Olympia underway. There's a website, www.communityrightssouthsound.org, and you can just email them also at info@communityrightssouthsound.org. And they're, as of when we're taping this program in February of 2014, it's kind of open and flexible as to how to proceed, but there's energy behind it.
And I think that even come April, May, June, whenever, it's still going to be, this isn't something that's going to come out of the ground and exist all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And that info@communityrightssouthsound.org.
Yes.
If people could if you're watching the show, send an email and tell us what you're interested in. What do you think a community rights ordinance should include?
Yeah.
And get involved.
That would be good. One of the things that CELDF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, does is called Democracy School, and you've been through it.
I have twice because it didn't all sink in the first time.
Yeah,
I
but
said,
now you're a
"Please, may I
TV
go
star
again?"
with it.
He was a good student.
Okay, and Kai, you've co-presented
He teaches
that.
Democracy
So
School.
tell us just a bit about what that is, because we're talking about maybe doing one possibly as early as late spring 2014.
Yeah, I think
in
it's
Olympia.
back to what I said, I think at the beginning about sort of deconstructing the myths of which we've been brought up with. So we walk through a lot of history about where a system of law comes from, how the Constitution is formed, even where, the idea of a regulatory agency, well, where does that come from? What's the history behind it? What was the intention with it? And the idea is that we need to know that stuff. So if it is about systemically changing things, we have to understand how that system has been built. So the school basically is about walking people through a lot of how that thing is assembled. I think, DJ, you said it, not here tonight, but I think in preparing for this, something about, the Wizard of Oz and moving the curtain. A lot of that's what Democracy School is. It's about moving that curtain aside so we can see what's behind there, because the system as it stands today is very well camouflaged.
Yeah.
And so the schools is hoping to reveal things, make connections for folks, and then ultimately show what folks are doing to step up and to step forward, because ultimately that's the only way things are going to shift, is if the people actually realize they have the power to do something about
And
it.
it's typically a weekend thing.
Yeah, it's usually Friday night, all day Saturday. Communities themselves host this. They ask the Legal Defense Fund to come in and teach it. They become not only educational tools, but they really need to be about activation tools and organizing tools, because just because we know something, well, that's great. If we can't put it into action, then we're losing a big part of what these things are about.
And I studied politics in college. I have a degree in it, and I had one hell of a lot of aha moments. I mean, the whole democracy is I'm sitting there saying, really?
Yeah.
It's incredible what you learn from it.
Breaking out of that box is just a crucial thing. I'm hoping this TV program that we're doing here will help folks with that.
Even knowing there is a box.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Step one.
Just very briefly, are there how would you like people to help? Certainly contact celdf.org.
Sure.
Contact the local affiliate,
Community Rights South Sound.
communityrightssouthsound.org, and then, like I say, email info@communityrightssouthsound.org. Other brief, quick things for ways people could
Yeah, so
move
for
it
people
ahead.
that are particularly interested in working on local food system issues and how they might relate to the CRO, we have a new food system council here in Thurston County called the Thurston Food System Council. And you can go to that website, thurstonfoodcouncil.org, and learn more about that group. And that's where we're trying to figure out how to take these general ideas that the regional policymakers have about a sustainable food system and make them real and really take tangible actions in the community. And if we're going to create a sustainable food system, it's not because the policymakers think it's a nice thing, it's because people in the community roll up their sleeves
Yeah.
to start working on making it happen.
Yeah, the way to have a real democracy is for people to create a real democracy from the grassroots up. So,
You have to demand it.
yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank Kai and John and TJ. I want to thank the folks who've been watching. Louis Brandeis, as I mentioned earlier in the show, a Supreme Court justice from 1916 to 1939, said we can have a democratic society or we can have the concentration of great wealth in the hands of few. We cannot have both. Public opinion polls keep showing that overwhelmingly the American people recognize that our government has become terribly corrupted by big money that funds election campaigns. We know that governmental agencies have been captured by the very industries that they're supposed to be regulating and regulating on our behalf. Instead, they're captured by them and they protect those industries from the public. Clever people have said that it's not that the system is broken, the problem is the system is fixed. So that's a kind of a clever play on words. Both political parties are part of the same system. The system is not this party or that party, it's both parties in that larger system. And so what are we to do? Herbert Marcuse said, the success of the system is to make unthinkable the possibility of alternatives. But we do need to have alternatives, and Buckminster Fuller said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. The CRO model, the Community Rights Ordinance, is that kind of a new model that can make the old model obsolete. Today's guest, John Pierce, told me a few days ago, we need to get the power that we were taught in school that we had, and he mentioned this earlier in the program. So perhaps the solution is to reclaim our fundamental rights, as Kai has urged us, and reinvent democracy from the grassroots up. Perhaps one solution is to create and adopt a community rights ordinance on some important issue in our community, and then adopt another CRO on another important issue, and keep doing this not just locally here, but in more communities. The more we do this, the more it will become an overwhelming tide. Democracy can be a lot of fun when we do it at the grassroots. You can be connected with information that we've talked about here and a lot of other issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. Locally, we're at 360-491-9093. People anywhere can connect with our website, www.olympiafor.org. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.